I am interested always in learning how people were first introduced to logosynthesis. Can you tell me a little bit about your introduction and what inspired you to train in this model?
Okay, yes. So I've been interested in stuff to do with energy for easily 15, 17 years. Started off with learning about kinesiology, and then EFT, emotional freedom technique, was a tapping. And the lady where I learned the tapping, I also did some therapy with her, and then she organized basic training in logosynthesis. And so I thought, well, this sounds really interesting and mysterious. So yeah, let's go and find out. And yes, it was absolutely a total, I don't know, a strong word for a really major discovery. It was just brilliant. I felt very much at ease with it straight away. And I saw how it worked at once. And because they were doing some demos, and I just couldn't believe how quickly and how effectively it worked. And we were also able to note that the effect stayed. It wasn't just for the time of the demo and a day or something, but it was permanent. So I thought this was really pretty. I was completely
blown away. I noticed that a lot of times we try to explain how it works, but it's when we have the opportunity to experience it for ourselves and also to be present when other people experience it, and
Exactly.
you can notice that something shifts.
Just to observe that was really amazing, because I'd been doing quite some training for my coaching and for different things in personal development, quite a few, and this was just a completely different universe. It was just so amazing, and I really liked the people that were drawn to it as well, and that turned out to be so true later on. I discovered this the community around logosynthesis, people who work with it, and that's just been an amazing discovery as well. But I immediately wanted to go on with it, even though. Of course, if you really think about it, how does this work? It's not so easy to explain, but it's just so effective that, to tell you the truth, I don't really need to know. I mean, I don't need to know how my electric light works. If I pull the switch, the light goes on, and if I use the method here, it just works. So I'm very pragmatic about that, and just so happy to have found this. Because I've done quite a bit of work around my own issues over the years. And there were things that, with sort of classical therapy, I just didn't not make much progress with. And with the logosynthesis, I've really been making some very big strides. And so that is wonderful, because to really feel the change and to feel more freedom from several issues, that is just, the best thing.
Yeah, I look at it from a corporate career and having a performance review over, and every year I had the same personality characteristics that I had to work on, mostly regarding lack of patience and my hurry up drivers. And so really it wasn't until I encountered logosynthesis that I was able to see some meaningful shifts. So those patterns of reacting when I'm in those situations were so consistent and so ingrained. And I've found that when I started to just apply the method, I was able to notice those patterns soften, and people around me noticed. And so, and so I think, even from your perspective as a coach, people are coming to you in transitions in their life, and people end up offering a lot of advice. But really, from a standpoint, we can maybe say you should do this or you should do that, but from a standpoint of logosynthesis, there are no shoulds. So how do you work with people around those transitions to guide them forward?
Yes, of course, transitions are always times when there is also stress going on, or it's stress that triggers the transition, or the transition triggers stress. But one way or another, it's rarely comfortable. And especially in these times that nobody's ever experienced anything that's going on like this. And so that makes a lot of people more insecure about, where am I going? What am I going to do? What will the circumstances be? And when you're under stress, then a lot of the beliefs that you have developed in your life will also become more, I noticed, more present. But that also means a lot of these beliefs are really restraining us and making our choices smaller and giving us less options, because we're just in a, like, sort of with blinders. And so I find logosynthesis very useful to find some of those beliefs, to identify them, because very often we're not aware of them. Because for us, I mean, it's called beliefs, it's for a reason, because we do believe that they are so true.
Right.
You have to
Right.
behave in a certain way. You should always do this. And a good professional does this, or, you know, or a good mother is supposed, there are all these ideas and beliefs and rules. And so the first thing is to figure out what they are exactly. And then secondly, we can usually have an idea where they came from. And then we can deal with the energy that was really blocked around the start of the belief. But the energy remains blocked, and so it keeps blocking us later on. And so I found it's really helpful to find some of those beliefs that can really hold you back. For
Yeah, and
example,
it's the reaction, right? So during times of change, people should act a certain way and they don't, or the boss should do something and they don't, because we're going through change, or the
yes,
company or the organization. And then when these things don't happen the way we believe that they should, we react to it. And when we're so
exactly.
stuck in that pattern of reaction, we
Yeah.
can't even stop to broaden our perspective. And from my experience is when we resolve those perceptions, those beliefs, we feel more at ease to have better conversations. So instead of reacting and getting triggered by someone, then we can actually have a better conversation to create more meaningful action going forward. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
it's hugely beneficial to be able to soften it.
Yes, exactly. Because when you are not under the influence of these things that push you in a certain direction, then your mind just has more freedom, more space to come up with different ideas as well, and you can be more creative. And what you were saying about people who don't do what these expectations that we have from our managers, from our colleagues, from the people who work for us, also, but also the government and the authorities. We have all these expectations, but these expectations are all based on beliefs.
Right.
And
Yes.
and it's the first step to just become aware of that, because a lot of people don't realize, because they think this is how, of course, this is how it should be. But then you say, okay, but who says that, and where does that come from? Oh, and then you
Yes, and I've noticed that, once I've stopped really fighting against the way things should be and resolved my reaction to it, then I'm calmer. And
yeah,
when I'm calmer, then people aren't reacting to me in the same manner. So, whether it's my children, whether it's people I work with, it's just and then that feels more supportive. And then you can have more meaningful conversations. And so instead of everybody attacking, and again, it's a piece of the culture that you're brought up in as well, because some environments, it's normal, and that's just the way we all talk or the way we all act, and it feels intense. And then somebody new comes into that environment and they're not used to that culture, and that doesn't feel so safe for them, or doesn't feel like a nice place to work. And so when we all are aware of what we're reacting to, whether we feel triggered because people aren't being nice, or whether we're triggered and not being nice, when we can resolve some of that, it creates a much calmer and more productive space to work.
Exactly.
So in the case study that you provided for the book, you talked about a client who's experienced some feelings of pressure because of workload and taking on added responsibility and being put on the spot, and some of the anxiety that was formed from that. Can you describe the case study a little bit and how that looks in your everyday practice?
Yes, I mean, this is a client I'd worked with for a while, and I'd used logosynthesis before when it was an online session. And I think people more and more are feeling pressurized with lockdown and being with the pandemic, so working from home. So I think there's a lot of additional stress for everyone who's working in a kind of would be an office environment, but is now at home. So I think that added an extra layer. But
Yes.
certainly with this client, she's quite very responsible and conscientious. And so she was finding herself saying yes to something, which in fact puts her really under pressure and made her feel inadequate. And yet she knew that she was quite capable. So sometimes we have situations which can kind of, as we say, trigger us, affect us, impact us. And suddenly we find we've got some body symptoms. So she came onto the call with this happening that day or the day before. And as soon as we got into talking, she could feel immediately, you know, her breath, her, you know, body symptoms. And so she realized that there was something that was out of alignment for her. And we worked with logosynthesis with it, as I described in the case study. And then what showed up, interestingly, was a previous event. So often, as we know in logosynthesis, it works very neatly in layers and very elegantly. So we work with one piece, and then actually that revealed another piece, because there was a sense of not being good enough, and yet she knew she was capable. So there was this incongruence, and this is where we can see, okay, so something's going on. I'm good at work, I'm good at my job on the one hand, and then this situation has taken me into a place of not feeling good enough. So what's going on? And sometimes a layer by layer. So as we say in logosynthesis terms, we might have 2 rounds, so 2 pieces of work, or 3 or more, to get to what a core underlying piece is. So with coaching, we don't go too deep. I don't go too deep. But there was already something surfacing that I described, which was linked to a manager that she'd had who was a bit of a bully. Mm-hmm. And she coped with that situation. It hadn't affected her unduly, but almost unconsciously, it had affected her self-esteem and her confidence. And so that was what was revealed. So sometimes it's like a pieces of a puzzle kind of, or something gets opened up, which then something lands even deeper within the session. So within an hour, the surface piece of the pressure and the manager, and then you get to a piece of feeling undermined and bullied, and then you get to checking in with her, how do you feel good enough? You know, what happens with that belief? Yeah, I can do the job. How confident are you? Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. So you've gone from a place of feeling really like undermined and not lacking in confidence to confidence within an hour session. And I think that's, amazing. And she did feedback to me as I write in the case study that she felt kind of rejuvenated and more relaxed. So we have these clients always report that they're more relaxed. There's a sense of calmness, something kind of settling in our energy fields when we've cleared some of those kind of small pieces that we don't even know that we've necessarily got, until another layer becomes revealed. So it's very elegant in that way.
Yeah, and when I was introduced to it, we were going through a lot of transition because the company I worked for, Kraft, was purchased by Heinz. And so during that time, there was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of change, a lot of new processes, a whole new culture was introduced to the company. And so we were all reacting in that moment.
Yes.
And what I noticed was, as I used logosynthesis for what I was reacting to, so like when I got irritated, when I got frustrated, when I felt that people were demanding too much from me, and I resolved my triggers, then I felt a sense of calm and focus so that I could focus on my job rather than getting caught up in the conversations about, can you believe that they asked us to do this? And I can't cope with it all. And I feel like I have to work all night and I still won't get my work done. And all of that pressure, when that pressure is gone, I felt I can focus on what I need to do, deliver my sales targets. I need to do certain contracts. And when I could just focus on what I knew that had to be done, a lot of the drama faded away.
Yes.
And when I wasn't getting engaged in all those conversations, then other people were better able to focus on their tasks as well. And so a lot of times what I hear in the work environment is we have to remove workload. But what I've noticed is when I remove my triggers and resolve my triggers, I have lots of energy and I'm better able to say no rather than just get angry at someone. So I'm better able to say no and set the proper expectations and feel better about my work. And it just made things, for me, it made things much more harmonious. And in our office environment, it made things more harmonious. And we were able to focus on the task at hand and what we had to do in order to get through a transition. So yeah, I really relate it when I read your story or your case study of feeling the pressure and being able to relieve that and know the path forward. So
yeah, one of the aspects of it as well that you were talking about as well, I think, is the boundary setting piece.
Yes.
Because in logosynthesis terms, if we can just deal with our reactions to what happens, but also remove what we call non-me energy that's not ours, then we're in a better, more resourced place to set better boundaries for ourselves.
Yes.
And also not take on too much. For example, the issue also with my client was being too responsible, taking on too much responsibility.
Yeah.
And then after working with logosynthesis, you can actually kind of reform those boundaries and reset them to be much more resourceful for you. And you're in a resource state, and as you said, it has an impact on everyone around you in the office as well.
Yes, and what I notice is a lot of times those patterns, we're not even aware of our patterns. And it's not just me that has patterns, right? We all are programmed with patterns based on our past experiences and based on our cultural attitudes. And we react based on our programming. And the more we can, especially in times of change, when when we're all kind of operating in a comfort zone and we all know what everyone does and the demands aren't too high, that tends to work quite efficiently. But when all of a sudden everything is thrown upside down, it's almost like things start to short circuit and the reactions we experience feel more intense because we're not really reacting in the present moment. We're reacting to something, some beliefs that we have about the way people should behave, about what others could do to help us out. And they're not really based in the present moment. So sometimes the intensity doesn't match the current situation, I find.
Yeah, absolutely.
So quite often I get asked from people is, can you use this with children? How do you answer that question, and what issues do you work with?
Yes, and yes. Logosynthesis with children is fantastic. I don't know why, but for them, I think this strange sentence, because for adults, sometimes the sentence of logosynthesis are a little bit strange. So they are like, oh, I don't know what does she want to make me say? Or adults are a little bit sometimes anxious with these sentences at the first time, no? Yes. And children, no. Children, they immediately feel that these sentences are making them feeling better. And it works very well with the children. Usually I say, oh, I have a magical sentence for you.
Mhm.
And they really like this magical aspect. And they feel that that's something special that works, and they are open, and it really, really works very well with children. And I think also they don't have the long life we have, so the long frozen energy we had all over our life. They're only 10, 15, or 20 years old, maybe 5 years old. So they really, it's very easy and quick. They don't have so much things to work on.
I always tell people, don't wait until you're 50 until you start doing this, because I have a lot of triggers by now.
Yes, or me too. We have a lot.
So in the book,
we have a long life to work on.
Yeah. In the book, you provided a case study about doing homework as a family, and Alex was struggling with his homework. And I found it interesting that you worked with both Alex and his dad, Chris. And can you maybe explain a little the benefit of having the parent or the father or mother involved and doing their own work first, and what benefit that has for the child, like Alex?
Yeah, usually I have sessions with kids, but I really like when it's possible to also work with the father or the mother, because I told you that with the kids it's very easy. It's a fast work. It's very natural. It works, but sometimes you need also the parents, but because the children live with their parents, and if the parents have beliefs or see in their child something, and think my child is not good in English, for example.
Yes.
Then your child will also, if he works with logosynthesis, he always will have this idea, this presence of the father who thinks that you're not good in English, and so it will continue. It will be more difficult to work. And also, I often see that the problems of the children are very similar to the problem of the father and the mother, because they live with the father or the mother, and they feel what they think, and they imitate the behaviors, and they are very connected to their parents. So it's very useful to work with both. With Chris and Alex, it was very interesting, because Chris came with a problem of homework. It was very difficult for him. He used to say, I hate homework. I don't want to do my homework. I don't understand why I have to do this homework. And so I did a session with him, and he worked on how he was feeling and what happened when he when he should do his homework. And then at the end of the session, I had to work on his belief that homework are useless. And I felt, when I gave him this sentence, I felt that this belief was not only his belief, but it was the belief of someone in the family. I had this sensation, no? Yeah. So I asked the mother, do you think that you or your husband could be involved in this topic? And she told me, yes, the father. I am sure that it's something it has to do with his father. So his father Alex was really kind, because he was very open to work also on this topic. And when he came, he told me, I have the same, my son, Chris, is like me, is all me. he doesn't like authorities, and he doesn't like when he has to do something. And so he went with this idea. My son is like me. He doesn't like to be constricted to do something. And so we had a session with Alex about his relationship with authority, and also with his story with homework.
Right. Yeah.
And at the end of the session with Alex, he told me, "Oh, for the first time, I see that Chris is not me. For the first time, I had this impression that we're not together. We are two different people, and so he can have his life, and I have mine, and I have my history." And it was very interesting because after the mother wrote me and she told me that he totally changed, Chris totally changed after the session of the father. He changed after his session because he was more collaborative with the homework. But after the session of the father, I think that Chris felt that something had changed in his father. And the mother told me, "Oh, now when you ask him, go and take me a bottle of milk in the fridge," now he goes and takes the bottle in the fridge, and he's not, no, I don't want to, not me, why me?
Right.
So all the atmosphere in the family changed.
I think a lot of us as parents can relate to that, right? Like it's
Yes.
something there. Kids can evoke a lot of emotion because we see them experience things that we may have struggled with when we were younger, and we don't want them to experience those struggles. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the case that you wrote for the book. So the book is Thriving in Our Times from Reactions to Action Using Logosynthesis. And in the book, we have a number of cases from international professionals like yourself. And the case that you provided describes Ella, a teacher, who was feeling frustrated with what the work that the students were sending in. And then she also felt guilty about it. So can you tell us a little bit about what shifted for her in the work that you did with her?
Yeah, first, it's great that people reflect that way that Ella did, and come to a coaching session to look at that, because she realized I could be a better teacher, if I could change something around that. And then she heard about logosynthesis and she came, and that was the first step. That's great that people see, okay, I can change something, go into coaching with logosynthesis, actually. Yeah, and she wanted to get kind of rid of this frustration on one hand, and she felt guilty at the same time because she was frustrated about kids. She thought they are not doing what they're supposed to do. And on the other hand, she realized that these kids had some problems in writing, and that made the guilt. She thought she was, I'm supposed to help these kids, and I can't help them because I'm frustrated and I can't pick them up where they are. And throughout this session, the couple of sessions, it wasn't only one, I think it was 2 or 3 sessions we had. We talked about her own situation, her own history around writing, around school, and there popped up, and she realized that this frustration and all this guilt stuff, that's had something to do with her own history around that, because she had troubles in writing. As a child, around 10, 12 years, she had to write these essays, and her mom told her, her mom looked at this essay before she gave it in and told her, hey, you can't give it in. That's impossible. That's too bad what you've written here. That's not for use. That was the first thing that happened. And she realized that there was a connection between this happening to her and what's happening to her reactions to these kids.
Yeah.
And so we started working on these blocks there.
Yeah, and those blocks, until we actually take the time to notice and connect with how we're reacting in the present, like what those thoughts, those emotions, those physical sensations are, we're not necessarily even aware that that's being triggered by something from a perception from the past.
Most people are not aware of that.
Yeah.
That's right. And I think that's the first step to starting realize that might not have to do with what's happening just now here.
Yeah. And I know for me, like when I was initially introduced to logosynthesis and introduced to Willem, I would say that I wasn't really aware of the impact of my reactions on other people. So I was working hard. I was going fast to get things done. I was, strong and working hard to do things right. But when everything, when the pressure built up, there's a lot of change and you feel like you have to do more, you get to a point where you end up reacting towards it. And so I would say on the one hand, there wasn't necessarily an awareness of how my reactions impacted others. But the other piece was I wasn't aware of a way to change how I reacted. So in the moment, I always had the same response. Like there wasn't a pause to think between that stimulus and that response. And so do you find that with your clients as well? And how does logosynthesis support that work?
Yeah, I think what you're saying, that not only with the clients, that's something I know for myself as well, that before I knew about logosynthesis, got to know it, I didn't have a tool even how to cope with it. Perhaps I saw what happened, that something happened, with this stimulus and reaction, but I didn't know what to do with it except talk about it, and that didn't really help me. And I think that's the same for the clients. Actually, it helped me to a certain point, but then it didn't go further on. Then it was more about coping, as you said, and through this learning logosynthesis, I got a tool to handle what happened, also to handle the stimulus at the one hand, and through handling the stimulus, handling my reactions to it,
Yeah.
And that actually also helped me and helped the clients to have the courage, to look at it, because I know, and they know that here is a tool to help you solve this.
Yes.
And that helps to not being scared anymore, to look into it, even if it looks scary at the moment,
Yeah, and I think when we recognize, and for me especially, I know that when I know that a reaction is something that's being triggered by something other than what's in front of me in the moment, then it takes some of the emotion out of it and it allows me to reflect on it, and not only reflect on it, but also resolve it. So I now have a method that I can clear it, and so that it doesn't continue to bother me anymore going forward. And for me, there are layers, and I have to decide if I'm doing self-coaching versus having someone guide me through the process. It's kind of in layers, but similar to what you mentioned, working with Ella, that it wasn't all in one session, but just even knowing that we can work through it is very liberating to me, that I can kind of work on it.
Yes, and I think that's the difference also between self-coaching, and going to a coach. It's important to go to a counselor or a coach to get these layers that you're saying, the ones that are a little bit deeper. But
Yes.
It's important to also get help there.
Yeah. Yeah. And to know that it doesn't have to continue to control you going forward, right? So you go to a coach, you have it resolved, and you can move forward without it. And especially now with what we're going through. So, if you think of the teachers that are working in such a challenging environment, and to know that it's natural to respond. So one piece is I know that I'm responding, so I'm going to take time for myself away from work and I'm going to kind of manage what's expected of me. And then on the other side, when I know that I can notice how I'm responding and resolve those triggers, then my energy is available for what's important to me. So a lot of times when I talk to people, their work is important to them. So if you're a teacher, the students are extremely important to you. And so when you can resolve what you're reacting to, you can be present with the students. And that's very different than constantly being triggered by them. Yeah.
It is, and I think you get better. You get better in your job when you're doing that, and that's the great thing also about this situation at the moment. It's always also a chance to solve one trigger, and each trigger I solve in this job I'm doing, I get better.
Yes.
That's the great thing, and you feel that, and that's what I love about it.
Yeah. When people say to you, oh, I have a method that sounds a lot like it, do you try to explain it, or how do you approach it? I need some help with this.
It's funny because I can see two different roads here. Like old me would have like really tried to push it down their throats and say this work, this is why you should do it, and blah blah blah. But this time I go like, well, maybe there's a similarity. Like logosynthesis came to birth from this more than 35 years of work of Willem Lammers, and he certainly was trained in several things before he worked. He discovered logosynthesis. He is a supervising and teaching transactional analyst, and he was training Gestalt, and he for sure became a supervisor trainer in EFT and so many more models. So I'm sure there are elements that resemble or come from other methods. But being myself a Peruvian, the best metaphor I can find to talk about this is like cuisine, like cooking. You can have many ingredients, but it's all about how you combine them. And that's one of the things that I appreciate the most about logosynthesis. Because yes, there are some elements that may resemble or come from other methods, but the combination in itself is original, and powerful, and the taste and the flavor is unique for each person.
And so what do you look to support your clients with? What's your area of interest or your specialty as a chef?
That's a good question. I guess I would have to say highly sensitive people, because I myself am a very sensitive man. Growing up, that was something I used to feel embarrassed about or struggling with, but I've discovered that that's actually part of my essence, and that's now how I can approach others and help others with, because I've been there, and I can easily see myself in those situations, and I've gone through those situations and solved them with logosynthesis, so I can meet people there and be there with them. And sometimes it's such a wide range of people. I've worked with a PhD candidate who was, procrastinating research, or the programmer who's overwhelmed with work and wants to help everybody, but then gets overwhelmed and feels guilty to say no, or the awarded scientist who's a pioneer woman who struggles in relationships, and that's later I found out because there was a history of sexual abuse, or maybe even psychologists who are struggling with corona fear themselves, and I help them deal with that as well. And there's such a wide range of people, but what they all have in common is that they're struggling emotionally. And logosynthesis is a really fine, smooth job at helping them, stop struggling and just, tackle whatever is causing, triggering that in them. So they just go to flow back again in life, go back with their lives and do whatever they want to do, live their mission. So
So in the case you provide, or in the book rather, you provided a beautiful case of guiding Dina through some fears and anxieties around coronavirus. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that and how you see that show up in your everyday practice.
Well, one of the things that Dina was struggling with was fear. She was waiting in line to cash a check that was issued by the government as aid during these current times. And while she was standing there in line, somebody coughed in her back of her. The back,
Oh my God.
she could feel it in her neck. And when she turned
I
around
heard
to the
someone
person,
cough yesterday. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
she startles and turns around, and the other person is not wearing a mask.
Yeah.
And she started having all these pictures of, oh my God, what's going to happen? I'm going to die, and my parents are going to get sick, and they're going to die too. And she's starting to get, hyperventilated about that when she even talks about it, or when she was talking about it. And I guess that's one of the things that I've gotten so good at helping people with, and it's about sometimes we start imagining what could happen in the future, and we
Yeah.
build up all these fantasies of what could happen, and we build up these very complex and detailed scenes of what may happen. And just by having those scenes in our personal space can be so triggering. And she was having this vivid picture of what was going to happen to her or her parents, and whenever she would think of that, she would cringe and go crazy, and just really frozen. And we just took care of those images of the fantasies, and she was like, wait, what? And she was calm again, and she was able to think through of how to take care of herself. And last time I talked with her, she said, you know what, she said I was right. And I said, what do you mean? I said, because that day in session, I just realized that all that I needed to do was wash my hands and keep distance and wear a mask. And that's what I've been doing, and it works. And I'm safe, and my parents are safe, and that's it. We're able to navigate these times effortlessly. And yeah, so I help people with this emotional struggles. When they take that out of their system, they're able to think by themselves on how to deal with the situation and creatively, and they do. So that's what I do mostly. I help people
Yeah.
struggle emotionally.
I never figured that I was actually struggling emotionally. I just kind of recognized that I was maybe a little overreactive at certain times. So maybe that was emotional. But what I noticed was when I followed that same process and calmed those reactions, things around me changed. So if I was in the line in the bank and I saw that, probably in the past, I might be a little abrupt. That might be one way to put it. And so now that, I've done some work, those triggers, and there's always lots of different triggers that I have to resolve. I might have waited, if I had worked on it earlier, maybe I could have resolved some more. But one of the things that I do find is that just the way I show up in my everyday life now feels more at ease. And so then I can focus on what's important for me instead of responding to everything that's going on around me. So yeah, so I'm coming from a position, I guess, where I never really thought I had any work to do, but that's what fascinates me so much, because I see that we're all acting and reacting based on the same way, but we all have a different story and a different history and different experiences and different intensity in those thoughts and different intensity in the feelings and different intensity in those physical sensations. But if we can all recognize that there is a way that we can kind of create our path forward, it feels a little more at ease, I guess. And so that's why I love seeing, especially, from different backgrounds and different practices and different groups of people, what is possible. And the beauty is that you don't have to analyze it. You can just notice what's bothering you in the moment and use that as information, like the thoughts, the emotions, where you feel it in your body. Like sometimes we'll get choked up or have a pit in their stomach, and we can use that information and resolve it, as opposed to having to cope with it or avoid it. So can you describe a little bit why it's so important or so beneficial, I guess, to be able to resolve a frozen perception, a frozen image or sound, as opposed to coping?
Okay, that's a really great question, because a lot of our psychotherapy is about how do we learn to cope and how do we reframe things from a cognitive perspective. And although I think it is important to cope, to learn how to cope and to find ways to gain insight, that doesn't mean that it's going to last And so the triggers can come up over and over and over again. But if you're able to get to the root cause of why you're suffering in this way, why it's so difficult, and you neutralize that auditory representation, or maybe it's an image that you see, or a sound, maybe it's a taste. You know, in military terms, when they're on deployments and there's combat trauma, there are, you know, the sounds of rocket attacks, and, you know, they sound very much like fireworks. So you come back from a deployment and you hear fireworks, you might be hitting the ground because it's not safe. And, you know, your life is at risk and you don't know where that rocket attack is going to land. It could land next to you. It could land in your tent. It could, you know, be hitting your comrade next to you. So those kinds of sounds can reverberate and be triggered in many other aspects of our life. So if you go back and you neutralize the first time that you've heard the trigger, or maybe it's the most recent time you've heard that trigger, and you go to the deployment and you bring up all the aspects of what happened, then when you go to the fireworks, when you come back and you're with your family, you can actually enjoy the fireworks. And yes, it might sound like a rocket attack, and you might go, oh yes, that's just like a rocket attack, but I'm here and I'm safe. And you don't get triggered right back to the original memory of what happened. Or maybe it's the smell. So I had a veteran who would come in to see me, and we did logosynthesis for quite some time and neutralized many, many triggers. And what I love also about this modality is that you can then eventually use it for self-coaching. And many of my military and veterans, once they've done their work with me, some of the deeper work, they can work themselves. So I had one guy, he was on this tropical vacation. And you know how you have these casitas or villas that are on these boardwalks on the lagoon?
Yes, yes.
So every time he would leave his villa, he noticed that he would start getting really anxious. And he couldn't quite put his finger on it. But around the second day, he realized it was the smell of the lagoon was just transporting him right back to when he was on his deployment. And it smelled just like that.
Isn't that interesting, eh?
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And the best part is that he just went, oh, Shanda would tell me to do my sentences. So out he pulls, because I have these little cards that I made up that are wallet size and they're laminated with the sentences on it. And he pulls it out, he takes it everywhere, and just did the sentences on the smell of the lagoon that smelled just like Afghanistan.
And if you can enjoy your vacation then, because the smell no longer takes you back to Afghanistan, you can be present at the resort. How powerful is that, right?
Yeah. And sometimes, so we talk about smells and tastes, and we talk about sights and sounds, and there are other ways too. So it can come in contact with your physical body. And so I had a military guy who came in one day and he said, Shanda, he said, I had the most horrible experience. I was on my property. He has this property he's getting ready to build. And he said, I slipped on the ice. And when my body hit the ice, he said, I then started crawling around in the woods, just like I was on my deployment. And he said, it was terrifying. He said it went on for like, he thinks probably an hour. He was like crawling around as if he was, you know, in combat trauma with insurgents. So when we explored it, what happened was when he fell and hit the ice and his body landed on the ice, it was just like when he was in an IED explosion, and the shock wave moved him right into the air and he landed on the ground further away from where, you know. And so sometimes these representations can come up and be triggering in our everyday life. So you fall on the ice, that's kind of a normal thing that can happen here in Canada, you know, but you don't expect that when you land on the ice, you're going to go into a full combat mode of being. Like, you don't expect that you're going to start crawling around on the ground wondering, where's your rifle and am I safe? And when I hear that crackle, what is that? Is that, you know, somebody coming toward me, an insurgence of the enemy? So when you take care of what happened on the deployment, then these things don't happen. But the interesting thing is, with trauma and complex trauma, PTSD, there's many, many, many slices of that proverbial salami, or layers of the onion to do. So it's very different. I know one of the questions we had talked about earlier is, what's the difference between single incident trauma and complex trauma? And single incident, you're working on maybe various aspects of one event that happened. But for military members who've been in combat, there's multiple events that have happened. So you can be working with someone for a very long time. You know, often it's just a few sessions when it's a single incident trauma, and it may have root causes that go back to childhood, or it may not.
And one of the things that I noticed, like even with complex trauma, when they can start to peel away layers and it starts to feel lighter, it's also very liberating for them to know that there is a solution, and to know that it doesn't have to always be with them, and that they can do something about it. And one of the things that really I've really noticed is that I am much more aware now of how people can respond based on frozen reactions. When I first was introduced to logosynthesis, I didn't relate to trauma and anxiety. I'm not a psychotherapist. And so when someone said, oh, you know, I can't do this because it makes me feel very, you know, whatever sensation might arise in their body. And I'm like, well, just get over it and just, you know, keep on going. And that is something a lot of times when we try to offer advice, we offer advice from our scope and our knowledge base. And we don't feel what the person who's experiencing that feels. And it's been quite transformational for me in this whole logosynthesis training, and experiencing just what other, like, to be aware of what other people experience, and then to hold space for them to be able to resolve it, so it doesn't have to continue to bother them going forward.